I'm Kuhan, and my birthday in a couple of weeks' time. I'll be 48 years old, and the day after will mark 10 years with Parkinson's for me. And I realise I'm not the typical face of Parkinson's, but that's precisely the point. There are many different faces of Parkinson's, and I'm just one. I'm struck by the diversity, the fact that 40% of people with Parkinson's are female, 10% are like me in that they're young onset, under the age of 50, and a similar percentage like me are non-white. And I'd like to sort of think of Parkinson's as a condition that doesn't like to discriminate. And I'd like to sort of share some of my insights into my own journey with Parkinson's and my belated involvement in research activities and some of the reasons why I was late to the game, and also share maybe some of my insights through my involvement in the race equality group in Parkinson's UK that's looking at some of the barriers to research for some of the underrepresented groups. And I thought I'd start by looking at some numbers. I know Rosie took us through some numbers earlier, but there is a high-level view that I think is worth noting, that most people with Parkinson's are just simply not involved in research. If you look at the wider population, or if you look at the research services network from Parkinson's UK, which has amassed 7,000 members, that's still only a fraction of the wider Parkinson's population, about 4%. And it's growing, which is great, but it's still relatively small, and only a subset of those are involved in clinical trials. If you look at the mix, the makeup of those research participants, that 7,000, you can see it's broadly reflective of the wider Parkinson's community in terms of age, in terms of age of diagnosis, in terms of the gender mix, slightly more female, but broadly in line with the profile of the wider Parkinson's community. Where it's not, and where there is a significant gap, is the ethnic mix within that base. So less than 5% of the research network is from a non-white background, and if you stack that up against the latest census data that was released last month, which was something like 19%, you can see there's a significant gap. And I think we need to ask the question why. And if I can just relate this to my own journey, I was, like I said, diagnosed 10 years ago in January, but it's only in the last year or so that I've been actively involved in research. So, why did it take so long for me? And some of the answers to this, I should say, are not specific to ethnicity or culture. I think some of this cuts across barriers to anybody from whatever shape or size they are, or color or gender. I think a lot of this is common themes of barriers, but some of it is specific to cultural nuances, and I'll try and explain some of mine. And I think from what I've seen, that's broadly reflective of some of the barriers from other ethnic groups. So I call those factors, those barriers, the AAA factors, the acceptance, awareness, and assurance, or rather the lack of acceptance of my condition, the lack of awareness of research, and a lack of assurance. And what I mean by that is trust, and I'll explain what that means in a moment. But those three prerequisites need to exist for me to take part in research, and I'll just delve into a little bit more detail as to what I mean by each. Acceptance, like many people with Parkinson's, 40% or 37%. I hid my condition for many years, and that number rises to 62% when you look to young onset Parkinson's. And the main reason for that was embarrassment, quite frankly. And I didn't know it, but I was in denial. and I was going through a grieving process, and I've written a blog on this, which I've left a link to below. And I think we need to understand, for many reasons, what the journey that people go through, and the journey to acceptance, because it can, in some cases, be quite a long journey, and that's to the detriment of the individual, but also to the detriment of their engagement in things like research. And taking part in research really would have been a sort of further dose of reality for me. So I avoided it. I didn't talk to friends and family much in the early years about my condition. In the first few years, I could count on one hand the amount of people that I told. And in the case of my family particularly, I wanted to sort of protect them. I think this is slightly a cultural thing. I didn't want them to worry. And in more extreme cases, from what I've seen, that need to protect, or perhaps that feeling of embarrassment as well, in some cases can lead on to feelings of shame, and shame on the individual that they feel, but also shame on their family and community. And particularly in Asian communities, that's a very, very strong factor. And all of that leads to further isolation and further disengagement. Awareness. I don't think we're sort of talking loud enough about research, quite frankly. I think we need to turn the dial. My first involvement in research came when somebody just reached out to me directly and asked me to be involved. And I was very happy to be involved, but that was the first time I was asked. And that was probably 5 or 6 years into my journey. I think we're too passive in our approach, putting things on a website or expecting people to search on social media for this stuff, or a lot of people aren't engaged in that way. A lot of people aren't taking part in these discussions. A lot of people aren't involved in these Zoom calls and steering groups and so on. The vast majority, as you saw from the numbers, are just not engaged. I also think language plays a role here, and I don't just mean English language. I mean what I see as a disconnect between the research world and the sort of language and terminology that's used there, and the everyday language that's used by people with Parkinson's, the patient community, and their loved ones. At times it feels like it's a different language, and quite frankly, I need an incentive to take part in research. Simply saying that it needs to be inclusive and messages around accessibility, it's not enough. I need an incentive, and for me, it wasn't a financial incentive. What sparked my interest was understanding, just like age and gender. I'm pretty sure that my ethnicity is playing a role in the flavor of Parkinson's that I have, and the symptom profile that I had. And I read one article, I remember, that suggested that people from a South Asian background may be more prone to dyskinesia. And certainly anecdotally, I can believe that. And that was the hook for me. And I think people need a hook. And then assurance. I had a very long, frustrating diagnosis process, which took the best part of a year, and it left me somewhat disillusioned. And I'm not alone in this. 1 in 3 takes over a year to get diagnosed. 1 in 4 have a misdiagnosis within that, and this really shapes their outlook with the medical and research community thereafter. It's nothing short of a traumatic process, and when you're not able to get answers to the most basic questions, it leaves you very disillusioned. Coupled with the fact that I was assured, or had promised, and this is my interpretation, that there would be a significant breakthrough or a cure in a number of years, and it's been a decade for me, and I'm wondering how many more years it's going to be. And I'm not begrudging any of the great work that happens in the research community, but I think researchers have a obligation, a responsibility here to be balanced in their reporting of research activities. A breakthrough for a researcher is not necessarily a breakthrough for me. And when I see headlines in the press about miracle cure, or more importantly, when my family see headlines in the press about a miracle cure, it raises those hopes, and often those hopes are dashed, if not delayed. So I think we need to be a bit realistic. There's great stuff happening, but I think we need to manage people's hope. And I remained hopeful, and I still do, but I remain sort of balanced in my outlook, and I'm focused on sort of living well with the condition today, and I think that's absolutely possible. And there are a couple of more A's that I'll throw into there is apathy and accessibility. Apathy is a real killer. You combine it with fatigue and rigidity and anxiety and mood fluctuations. It's like a weight that bears down on you, stops you doing things that you might want to do, or leaves you just lost in certain ways. I think we need to recognize that and make it easier for people to take part in research. One of my other triggers for taking part in research was COVID, was lockdown specifically, because it gave me more opportunity to do things online. And it just made things a lot easier for me. And it also made me realize that research is more than just clinical trials, and clinical trials is more than just about taking drugs. And that was something that I wasn't aware of. And it was something that was an eye-opener for me. And I'll just briefly touch on, lastly, my involvement with the Parkinson's UK Research Equality and Research Group, and where I see many of these themes echoed. And I'll leave you with a quote there, which is actually from myself. And there's a few other quotes and great insights from that group, which you'll be able to find on various blogs on their website. Yeah, that's it from me. That's my story. So thank you very much for listening.